Good evening. I'm Laura Gomez, and I will be moderating this evening's public listening session. Before we begin tonight's meeting, I would like to remind our audience of some important details for tonight. This meeting is being live streamed on YouTube. A recording of this meeting will be available on YouTube after the meeting. During this listening session, we kindly ask that speakers refrain from demonstrating aggressive behaviors. This includes discriminatory language, personal insults, and obscenity. And lastly, the event organizer reserves the right to mute or remove speakers who violate these standards of conduct. I would like to now introduce you to the Executive Director of the UAS Integration Office, Jay Merkel.
Thank you, Laura, and welcome to all our attendees. Welcome to our first virtual public meeting. We've invited you here today to give us feedback on the Beyond Visual Line of Sight Aviation Rulemaking Committee's report. And I'll now pronounce that as the BVLOS ARC. The BVLOS ARC, which was comprised of 86 representatives from many different organizations, was established a little more than a year ago to draft recommendations for performance-based regulatory requirements that would normalize safe, scalable, economically viable, and environmentally advantageous UAS BVLOS operations. The ARC presented the FAA with its final report on March 10th of this year. This report represents a committee's perspective on what they believe will provide benefits to underserved areas and opening doors to aviation that were previously closed, such as for people with disabilities. Introducing a clean energy transportation solution to fight climate change and enhancing environmental justice, and seek to provide significant economic, environmental, and equity benefits to the public, but finding themselves held back due to bureaucratic hurdles and struggling to fit into a regulatory framework that never contemplated unmanned aircraft or UA or uncrewed aircraft, as we like to say now. And I think that last point is very important because the tradition of aviation and our regulatory framework has been built up over many, many years with the inherent assumption that there was a person on board that aircraft, controlling that aircraft, in that aircraft. And so things like mandating seatbelts don't apply to drones anymore. And this has become very problematic for the drone community, and trying to work within a safe regulatory framework, but without the burden of the assumptions of an aircraft that has a pilot and or passengers on it. This report reflects a perspective on what the committee feels will be necessary beyond FAA regulations to ensure that the BVLOS ecosystem moves forward effectively. So they not only commented on things that they thought the FAA should do, they also commented beyond that in areas that are beyond FAA authorities. While this perspective is not the FAA's purview, today it's important that we hear from all of you on what you feel will be necessary and crucial as the FAA considers the next steps on the path to BVLOS regulations. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility are important principles to the FAA. So it is important to me to make sure that we capture perspectives and viewpoints from all stakeholders throughout the community, whether they're in the aviation community, the community that these drones fly over, or the community that these drones serve. Now that you've had time to review the recommendations in the BVLOS ARC report, I'm looking forward to hearing your feedback today. And since this event is being live streamed, your engagement is also helping the FAA to continue building awareness about drone technology. Now I'm going to turn things back over to Laura so we can get this show started. Over to you, Laura.
Thank you, Jay. Before we begin tonight's listening session, I would like to go over a few details about the comments we've received and how they will be documented and recorded. First, we will document all oral and written comments as part of official record. That record will be transmitted back to the agency as a result from today's listening session. Comments made on the YouTube platform or other social media platforms will not be considered official comments and will not be captured for the record. Those who are in the audience and viewing are invited and can provide written comments by emailing the following email address that will be incorporated into the chat and which I'll now pronounce: 9-FAA-UAS-BVLOS@FAA.gov. The FAA will continue to accept written comments until June 29th of 2022. Comments, again, must be submitted to this email in order to be considered as official record. A few details about tonight's listening session. In this listening session, we will hear from those who responded to our call for today's meeting and chose to share their perspective publicly on record regarding the UAS ARC BVLOS report. This is not a question-answer format where the agency engages in a discussion or answers general or technical questions directly, but rather the agency's role today is to listen, and we respect the opportunity to hear what commenters have to say. How comments will be handled tonight. I will call on commenters to speak based in the order that the requests were received. I will read the names of the commenters two at a time. When you hear your name called, please raise the hand function to let us know that you are ready to provide comment. Once I call your name a second time, you will be able to unmute and make your comment. All commenters, please remember that you have 5 minutes to make your comment, and then we will call the next name on the list. I will now open the session for comments from the public. Lisa Ellman and Andrew Moore, please raise your hand.
Laura, I see we have Andrew raising his.
Andrew Moore, please proceed to make your comment.
Well, good evening. I am Andrew Moore, CEO of the National Agricultural Aviation Association. We are the association that represents interests of the 1,560 U.S. aerial application business owners and their pilots that use aircraft to enhance the production of food, fiber, and bioenergy. We also protect forestry, we protect waterways, pasture land, and rangeland, and control health-threatening pests that spread deadly diseases. Our small businesses treat nearly 1/3 or 127 million acres of U.S. cropland each year. Manned aerial application is a vitally important method of applying plant nutrients, seeds, and pesticides because it permits large areas to be covered rapidly, often over terrain that is too wet or otherwise inaccessible to terrestrial applications. It also treats above the crop canopy, and it doesn't disrupt the crop and damage it. So the amount of cropland needed to replace the yield lost of aerial application was not available. And this is just for corn, wheat, soybeans, cotton, and rice crops alone is 27.4 million acres. Now that's roughly the size of Tennessee. So the value of our industry, the U.S. aerial application industry, for just those 5 crops is estimated to be about $37 billion, billion with a B. So this figure is expected to grow substantially and in importance as food prices increase, as food production becomes an issue of growing importance due to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and to growing supply and demand due to our growing global population. So that's just a background of our industry, but we have a shared goal with the FAA of augmenting aviation safety, not abating it. Yet we greatly fear that should the recommendations within the UAS BVLOS ARC report become policy, it will markedly compromise the safety of U.S. ag aircraft and pilots. that routinely operate in that same airspace of 500 feet down to 10 feet above ground level. Now, that's the same airspace that the ARC is recommending UAS BVLOS operations be able to fly. Our industry is the segment of manned aviation most affected likely by the proposals in the ARC due to ag aircraft flying a combined total of 24.4 million miles annually at an average altitude of 38 feet, again, in the same area of the BVLOS UAS. In some instances, per the UAS BVLOS ARC recommendations, these unmanned aircraft would be able to fly either without ADS-B avoidance technology and or not give right-of-way to manned aircraft. This is a recipe for an aviation safety disaster. The small size of UAS effectively prevents manned pilots from physically seeing them. There was a study done in 2015 by the Colorado Agricultural Aviation Association, and it partnered with the Colorado Department of Agriculture, Agrobotics, and UAS Colorado. So UAS related entities, and they tested if manned agricultural aviation could locate a UAS over a field. Of 4 fixed wing aircraft pilots, only 1 could locate the UAS and could only do so for a few seconds. The only helicopter, manned helicopter, which included a pilot and a visual observer, could find the UAS, but reported that it was extremely difficult to maintain visual contact. So putting the onus on a manned aircraft to sense and avoid unseeable UASs, again, is a huge aviation safety risk. Research conducted by the University of Dayton mimicked a collision between a small 2.1 pound drone UAS and a Mooney M20 aircraft, and that did extensive damage to the wing of that manned aircraft. Should such a collision occur with an agricultural aircraft through its cockpit window or elsewhere while it is making a pass in the field at the standard application height of 10 feet AGL, when we typically are making an application, or even at 500 feet where we're fairing, that would be little opportunity for the pilot to avoid crashing the agricultural aircraft. So the ARC proposal granting UAS to fly BVLOS without giving right-of-way or equipping with ADS-B technology when operating in a shielded area, which the ARC defined as 100 feet above a vertical object or within 100 feet horizontally of the same obstacle, which could be any plant or tree or any structure, is arguably the biggest aviation safety risk provision in the ARC. Ag aircraft.
Mr. Moore,
Yes.
I regret to inform you your 5 minutes has passed.
Okay.
But thank you for your comment. And if you have more, please make sure that you do submit them via email.
And we have, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
All right.
I will now call on Lisa Ellman. Please proceed.
Thank you, Laura. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Ellman. I'm the Executive Director of the Commercial Drone Alliance. The Commercial Drone Alliance is an independent nonprofit organization led by key leaders in the commercial drone and advanced air mobility industries. We very much appreciate the opportunity to be with you today, to provide some remarks at this very important public meeting in strong support of the Beyond Visual Line of Sight ARC final report. The CDA urges the FAA to move forward expeditiously in promulgating a Beyond Visual Line of Sight final rule consistent with the recommendations in the Beyond Visual Line of Sight ARC final report, so that the enormous benefits of Beyond Visual Line of Sight UAS operations can be realized for the benefit of Americans, communities, and businesses. Our American competitiveness in the global economy and U.S. leadership in global aviation is at risk due to a lack of regulatory certainty and risk-appropriate oversight for UAS. So I know we have limited time today. We'll certainly be submitting written comments as well, but I just want to use my 5 minutes today to make 4 key points. First, the why we're here today, to explain the need for UAS-specific rules, the significant public benefits to scaling our industry, and second, the what, how implementing these ARC recommendations is the next logical step for the FAA, and how enabling a shared collaborative airspace is the key to unlocking these benefits. Now, the CDA was honored to lead the ARC's working group on market drivers. We examined alongside many other stakeholders how the industry is designed and funded. We looked at the societal benefits and what the industry needs in order to scale. And we found first that the UAS industry is diverse and it's rapidly evolving. The UAS industry is designed and funded very differently from the legacy aviation industry. So it's therefore essential that any UAS regulations account for these variations and be future-proofed in order to account for how quickly UAS technology is evolving. Simply using the regulations that have served traditional aviation for decades just does not work. So given that the industry needs new rules, why should the federal government spend its time and energy on promulgating these rulemakings? Because the public benefits to scaling commercial drone operations are significant. And countries around the world are already scaling commercial drone operations for the benefit of their own citizens. We're seeing, huge safety enhancements in the transportation system. UAS can save lives by delivering critical supplies to communities in need and inspect and monitoring critical infrastructure, assisting with disaster response and first responders, and supporting the economy and creating jobs, promoting equity, including for disadvantaged communities and the disability community, and enhancing sustainability. But unfortunately, these significant public benefits will never be realized in the United States if UAS, beyond visual on-site operations, cannot be scaled. The regulatory framework has lagged behind the technology development, and that's why the ARC final report is a crucial and significant step forward toward achieving safe, secure, and scalable beyond visual on-site UAS operations in the US. Now, the recommendations are the next logical step. We had, input from 87 organizations representing all kinds of stakeholders, 40 government observers, and the culmination of thousands of person hours of work, several months of meetings, and extensive drafting and reviewing, revising, and voting. Now, the one recommendation in the final report with which opponents have taken issue relates to the proposed aviation right-of-way rules, which recognize that the airspace is shared and collaborative. Since the current right-of-way rules do not address autonomous aircraft, the ARC's recommendations reflect a shared risk model in order to safely integrate newly autonomous aircraft, taking into account the volume and nature of aircraft operations currently at this altitude and aircraft collision avoidance rules and responsibilities. This recommendation will better protect pilots who operate at these critically low altitudes from potential collisions and will allow thousands of extremely high-risk, low-altitude operations to be accomplished by drones. The CDA looks forward to continuing to work with the FAA and other stakeholders to make this all possible. The ARC final report recommends a clear and comprehensive regulatory approach that will unlock substantial benefits and safely. Now it's imperative that the FAA build on this momentum and considered reports of the ARC and urgently move to rapidly implement these recommendations in the form of a final rule. Anything less will jeopardize the countless benefits of beyond visual on-site UAS operations, as well as relinquish America's longstanding leadership role in global aviation. We appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa and Laura. And thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Andrew. And Laura, could you please call in our next two speakers, Michael Robbins and James Farrell?
Correct. Thank you, Jay. Michael Robbins, please unmute and proceed with your comments.
Thank you, Laura. And thank you for allowing me to provide comments today at this public listening session. My name is Michael Robbins, and I'm the Executive Vice President of Government and Public Affairs for AUVSI, the Association for Uncrewed Vehicle Systems International. Our association advocates for the uncrewed industry in 3 domains: air, ground, and maritime, for commercial, civil, and defense applications. Within the commercial air domain, we have been very engaged in the Beyond Visual Line of Sight Aviation Rulemaking Committee and its release of the final report. Several of our Air Advocacy Committee members, our board members, and our President and CEO, Brian Wynn, sat on the ARC and took part in its important work, along with dozens of other ARC members who collectively spent many thousands of hours on the final product. AUVSI concurs with the final ARC report. We believe that the report is a reasonable product that is the result of an open and transparent process that allowed many diverse and divergent groups and stakeholders to have input into the report. Groups didn't always agree, but everyone was heard. The BVLOS ARC was truly a model in transparency, deliberation, and compromise, and its chairs, Sean Cassidy and Eileen Lockhart, deserve recognition for their leadership and their flexibility. as well as Jay Merkel and the FAA from the FAA and his team in the UAS Integration Office for ensuring the ARC report was released in a timely manner. The report focused first and foremost on safety. The report put forward a safety-forward plan to welcome new users into the airspace without ever compromising safety, and it deserves aviation industry support and to be advanced by the FAA without haste. The ARC report accomplished its goal of providing common sense recommendations for performance-based regulatory requirements to normalize safe, scalable, economically viable, and environmentally advantageous UAS BVLOS operations that are not under positive ATC. The ARC report's recommendation to adjust right-of-way rules in a very narrow swath of airspace to accommodate UAS operations in these predefined areas of highest safety and economic benefit is exceptionally reasonable, and frankly represents a significant compromise by the UAS industry to the general aviation community. AUVSI will expand upon this issue significantly in our written comments. To keep the process of the rulemaking moving forward, we believe that the FAA should issue a BVLOS NPRM as soon as possible. There will no doubt be numerous comments to adjudicate from all corners of industry. However, with each delay in moving forward with this important rule, the U.S. role as the preeminent leader in the aviation space continues to slip further as other nations race ahead with embracing innovation in the aviation sector. AUVSI is pleased that the FAA has granted numerous BVLOS waivers enabling low altitude operations, including those shielded by structures and terrain, and that the FAA informed the Advanced Aviation Advisory Committee in February of 2022 this year that the agency is exploring BVLOS standard scenarios and predefined risk assessments to streamline and standardize low-risk, high-value BVLOS approvals. While the process of rulemaking continues, AUVSI encourages the FAA to standardize the review process for BVLOS waivers, as it will ensure safety, reduce FAA review resources, and provide more certainty for regulated entities. Therefore, while working on the NPRM, AUVSI requests that the FAA issue guidance, such as standard scenarios or predefined risk assessments, providing accelerated pathways to enable low altitude operations under the current rules. The FAA should also explore how to implement the ARC recommendation that airworthiness certification should not be required for smaller unmanned aircraft operating in low-risk environments. Commercial drone operations provide essential services to the American public, including delivering life-saving medicines in agriculture and conducting critical infrastructure inspection. Civil operations include search and rescue, drones as first responders, and firefighting. To fully realize these benefits, the FAA must continue the momentum of the BVLOS ARC by advancing a rulemaking process and updating the regulatory framework to provide a pathway for these operations and the economic, societal, workforce, and environmental benefits that will follow. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and we look forward to a BVLOS NPRM in the near future and the opportunity to comment again on that next step in the rulemaking process. Over.
Thank you, Michael. Laura, our next speaker, please.
Our next speaker is Mr. James Farrell. Mr. James, please unmute yourself and proceed with your comments.
I'm grateful for this opportunity to speak. 5 minutes will be enough because I have a ton of documentation plus videos covering the topic. The report being reviewed today logically addresses right-of-way rules and quantifying risk. Regardless of how those decisions are made, we cannot go wrong with a big improvement in accuracy. I address that here technically with no design on and no talent for administration. My focus is on collision avoidance, CA. What I'm saying could initially invite skepticism, but it's supported by in-flight data validation, easily understood without expertise. Future air traffic, manned and unmanned, cannot be precisely predicted, but this much is clear. Constant increase in growth eventually brings crowding to a crisis in allocation of airspace. Information traditionally used for ATM, latitude, longitude, speed, etc., is a poor choice for collision avoidance. Existing plans cannot enable reliable collision avoidance in a horizontal plane. TCAS is a last resort in air It can't work at low altitude, and it does nothing about runway incursions. Consider these fundamentals. At the dawn of aviation, limited information was sufficient for ATM. Traffic was very low. ATM has continued those historic ways. Now with crowding, danger warning is extremely limited. The key is not latitude and longitude. At 30 or 130 degrees longitude, collision avoidance depends on position relative to other objects. Also, collision avoidance needs anticipated future separation, that is, in advance of the closest approach time. A minute or two ahead is needed for undertaking moderate evasive actions before closest approach. For those evasive actions to be effective, they must be based on accurate dynamics. The primitive trail of breadcrumbs approach gives inaccurate dynamics unsuitable for collision avoidance. Velocity performance now is non-committal, not vectorial, not relative, and it has weak statistics. Without accurate relative velocity vectors, ADS-B remains wedded to decades-old TCAS. TCAS is limited by the technology of its time. Accurate along range, but not cross range. Cross range knowledge comes only through sightline rotation, which happens only at close distances. But close distance is exactly what collision avoidance needs to prevent. So danger becomes evident only when it's very late. That basic limitation precludes evasion until emergency demands precipitous action. I can submit a short list of references, each citing other sources for anyone who wants to pursue this. It will include a 2013 Institute of Navigation journal manuscript demonstrating orders of magnitude improvement in velocity accuracy in flight, centimeter per second velocity residuals. It was done by applying differential satellite navigation to individual measurements shared only after successfully passing integrity testing. That's all the time that I need. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Laura, to our next speaker, please.
Thank you, Jay. Rex Alexander. Mr. Alexander, please raise your hand and unmute yourself, please, and proceed with comments.
Thank you very much. My name is Rex Alexander. I am the president and executive director of 5 Alpha, a heliport and vertiport aeronautical consultancy specialized in the design and development of helicopter and powered lift infrastructure with 25 plus years of experience in this field. I also serve as the Vertical Flight Society's infrastructure advisor. Thank you very much for the opportunity to contribute to this discussion. My comments today center around safeguarding of airspace and the adequate deconfliction of UAS BVLOS from other air traffic at low altitude. A primary concern is the proper recognition, identification, and avoidance of helicopter and powered lift landing areas, their associated airspace, and the imaginary surfaces of said airspace dictated by the Federal Aviation Administration to assure safe flight operations. In the ARC draft, there is a section and several sections that have the right-of-way rules for low altitude operations. Within that, it talks about airport and heliport requirements for low altitude UAS BVLOS, and they specifically quote, UAS BVLOS operations may not be conducted within a half a nautical mile of a published heliport without prior coordination with the airport or heliport manager / operator. Now, in just dissecting that, there is some issues with the first part, which is the half a nautical mile. And we get into the half nautical mile. If the elevation where the US is being operated is equal to the elevation of the heliport, final approach and takeoff area, and the UAS is at 400 feet, at a half a nautical mile from the center of the heliport, the UAS will actually penetrate the imaginary surface as identified as the approach surface defined in 14 CFR Part 77.23 by at least 27 feet. However, if the elevation for where the UAS is located and being operated is higher or greater than the FADO, this penetration easily penetrate the imaginary surface more significantly, up to and including 399 feet. When we look at published heliports is a concern. There are an estimated 2,000 plus hospital heliports in existence and in operation within the US whose information is neither captured or published by the Federal Aviation Administration. There are also an estimated 8,000 plus pre-designated emergency landing areas, as referred to in the EMS industry and law enforcement and fire industry as PELAs, P-E-L-A, across the US, which are not categorized. They're utilized by air ambulance operators, law enforcement, Coast Guard, and other state and federal agencies. When we look at medical use versus hospital heliports, there is a published document by NASA from 2019 that specifically estimates upwards of 2,000 hospital heliports that are unaccounted for. This means that UAS BVLOS would not know they exist and would not know to avoid those locations. The heliport data integrity issue that we've struggled with for years, we look at the heliport manager information, which is referenced by the ARC. The contact information regarding managers of individual heliports is woefully inaccurate, missing, and out of date in many cases. Several of the phone numbers listed are to answering machines and fax machines. Much of this information has not been updated in 20 to 30 years. We also get into the issues of airspace accountability and site accountability, whereas heliports have been known to be mislocated on their latitude and longitude by 2, 3, and 4 miles. There's actually a case in Nashville, Tennessee of a heliport that is mislocated by some 55 statute miles. So US BVLOS would not know it exists, would not know to avoid that area. When we get back into the published, how would you know that there is a heliport at a hospital? When we look at the distances that we're trying to achieve, a half a nautical mile is not enough to maintain clearance. A recommendation would be increase that by doubling it to 1 nautical mile, which would provide the increased distance for the maximum separation of those aircraft performing operations to and from landing sites. In looking at what operations do occur at 500 feet and below, I do believe that the organization is not paying close enough attention to the amount of aviation that takes place from 500 feet and below. There's a significant amount of aviation conducted by law enforcement, EMS, agriculture, search and rescue, pipeline patrols, electronic news gathering, and photography. Most of those operations occur at 500 feet and below. Additionally, and lastly, accountability of drone ports. We need a definition of what a drone port is. We need to account for that drone port. It needs to be charted.
Mr. Alexander, I unfortunately I have to interrupt you as your 5 minutes is up.
Nope, I appreciate it. Thank you. I will submit everything.
Wonderful. We appreciate that. Our next commenter, Lily Johnson.
Got it.
Ms. Johnson, would you please raise your hand and unmute yourself and proceed with comments?
Thank you. I'm commenting on behalf of the Experimental Aircraft Association, or EAA. We are a crewed aircraft organization that represents over 250,000 pilots, aircraft builders, owners, and aviation enthusiasts, including a wide array of airspace users that fly primarily at altitudes below 500 feet AGL. EAA recognizes the potential that drones have in the future of air operations and supports their safe integration into U.S. First, the safety of crewed aircraft must be the top priority in any discussions of U.S. Yes?
You're cutting in and out, Lily.
Oh, hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
Let's see. We firmly believe that to achieve this goal, 3 conditions must be met. First, The safety of crewed aircraft must be the top priority in any discussions of UAS integration. For the purposes of these comments, the term aircraft includes ultralight vehicles. Second, no new airspace restrictions should be placed on crewed operations because of drone flights. And third, crewed aircraft should not be required to install new equipment beyond that already required by FAA regulation. Unfortunately, the requirements in the current BVLOS ARC final report do not meet these conditions. And if the FAA were to move forward with the recommendations as written, the safety of crewed aircraft pilots would be at risk. The ARC operates under the assumption that these recommendations do not significantly impact crewed operations because the number of general aviation aircraft operating under 500 feet is small. This couldn't be further from the truth. A large number of aircraft frequently and legally operate below 500 feet, including ultralight, lighter than air, powered parachute, rotorcraft, antique, seaplane, backcountry, and agricultural operators. A substantial number of operations occur at uncharted airports and helipads in the United States as well, contributing to a much more populated airspace than the BVLOS ARC and its recommendations realize. Even if the number of operators below 500 feet were as small as the report authors assume, the risk to human life would be unacceptable. These recommendations set forth an aviation safety environment where crewed operators either equip with tabs or ADS-B or yield the right-of-way to drones. Not only does this go against all aviation right-of-way rules, where the less maneuverable aircraft has the right-of-way over others, it would hand the right-of-way from humans to automation in a life or death scenario, a situation that raises serious ethical concerns. EAA appreciates the work that the ARC has done to keep equipment mandates out of the final report. However, this is a mandate in all but name, as it forces crewed aircraft to equip or forfeit their own safety. The final report acknowledges that these recommendations may increase equipage rates beyond the current 49% of general aviation aircraft that are already ADS-B equipped, increasing safety for all NAS users. However, this rationale fails to consider that ADS-B and TABS equipment is not reliable to the extent necessary to guarantee safety-critical deconfliction. ADS-B was never intended to be a tool for collision avoidance. It was developed for traffic management and safe situational awareness, but is not reliable enough to be the sole method for drone operators to avoid other aircraft, particularly at the lower altitudes addressed in this report. These recommendations once again put the safety of crewed aircraft at risk by relying on a system that is not built for this proposed purpose. Furthermore, ADS-B and TABS is currently not even possible to install in many lighter than air and light sport aircraft due to a lack of an electrical system, inability to permanently mount, and or altering weight and balance beyond operational limits. It is also impossible to install in any ultralight under current international rules due to a lack of a registration number, denying a large number of aviators from the ability to obtain right-of-way over UAS. In VFR-GA operations, crewed aircraft meet separation requirements primarily by visually seeing and avoiding other crewed aircraft. According to these recommendations, unequipped crewed aircraft would be completely reliant on one-sided visual separation to avoid collisions with drones. If UAS are not held to an equivalent standard for means of collision avoidance, crewed aircraft are again put at an unacceptable level of risk that is not currently present in operations where two crewed aircraft are looking for each other. Additionally, most small UAS are significantly smaller than crewed aircraft and therefore more likely to be visually acquired only at close range. Even if the crewed aircraft pilot is able to spot an encroaching drone, by the time it is visible, the less maneuverable crewed aircraft may not have the capability to perform an evasive maneuver with enough time to avoid a collision. Thank you for providing this opportunity to share our concerns. We plan to submit written comments as well to expand on these points. Please let us know if you have any questions.
Thank you for your comments, Laura. Do we have any additional speakers today?
No, we do not, Jay. And with that, I'd like to, with that last comment, I'd like to conclude tonight's listening session. Again, the commenters we heard from today submitted a request to publicly speak today. So I really want to thank everyone for your participation, your viewing, and to those who submitted written comments. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Jay, for some closing remarks.
Okay, thank you, Laura. That does conclude our meeting. I want to thank all of our commenters participating tonight. I also want to thank those who will end up listening to this in the recorded version of YouTube. It's important to get these messages out, and it's important to have this very robust public debate. As Laura said at the start of the meeting, written comments will be accepted through June 29th. If you would like to submit a written comment, please send it to 9-FAA-UAS-BVLOS@faa.gov. We may hold another public session next month, so make sure to keep an eye out on the Federal Register. That is the area where we must post public meetings. This meeting was live streamed and we will be available to view on YouTube at youtube.com/FAA News. Again, youtube.com/FAA News. Thank you again for sharing your feedback and have a good evening.